upload it. Hold on. Okay. Hi, everyone. Pavel, thank you, Pavel, for inviting me over. So my name is Simcha, or short for Sim. I'm a lawyer from Israel. As you know, Israel is a country that we see in many spaces, and cryptocurrency is one of them. So first of all, I think it's important that we all base our data on real facts and not hearsay. We see that a lot, especially in this space. In God we trust, but all others must bring data. So I want to talk about 8 points which are not necessarily related one to another. Happy to hear some questions from the crowd. I saw a lot of issues going back and forth on both ICOs, jurisdictions, legal matters. I hope I'll be able to answer a couple. So first of all, Israel at a glance. By raising your hand, who was in Israel until now? Oh, you can raise your hand a couple of times. So we're located in the Middle East. Population is about 8.5 million. Very small country. Our neighborhood is not as nice as it is over here. It's a bit difficult. These are basically the basic metrics that you'll see about Israel. Whoever is not familiar with and whoever hasn't been yet, I suggest that you reciprocate. I see that many fellow Israelis come to Kiev and Uman to visit, so it would be nice. So a great place to do business. You're probably familiar with Kim Kardashian, whoever has Instagram. So Kim Kardashian, as of 2 days ago, signed an agreement to represent an Israeli manufacturer of sunglasses in the US. Next to her is, you probably don't know her, the supermodel Bar Rafaeli from Sports Illustrated or anywhere else. I assume there are a lot of men in the crowd, so you probably know her. Gal Gadot, Superwoman, she's also from our country. Country is very gay-friendly, so I heard some folks from San Francisco, so we're not San Francisco, but we're not that far. So doing business in Israel is relatively easy and great. Advantages. So first of all, if you compare Israel to Silicon Valley, you can invest at lower valuations for the same company. So if you're coming in with $1, $2, $3 million, you will be able to get more percentage for your money in Israel, contrary to Silicon Valley. There's no CFIUS or similar procedure. I don't know if anyone's familiar with CFIUS, but CFIUS, Gordon is nodding. In the US, post-Trump, the government could basically intervene in investments made by foreign countries, for example, China, investing in technology. And there are situations where the US government can basically tell Chinese investors or anyone else that they cannot invest because the product are highly sensitive in terms of homeland security. Most Israeli companies are built to be international from the get-go, so all the documents are always going to be in English. You're not going to see anything in Hebrew. It's all basically teed up for that. Most companies in Israel are also built in order to have joint ventures or other corporations outside of the country. Many Israeli companies have developers in the Ukraine, in Kharkiv, I forgot the other one, the famous one, and Kiev. The judicial system is relatively transparent and independent. It does take a long time, not like in Delaware, to reach a verdict, but it's very clear. Corruption in judicial system is very low, so that is good. And there's equal treatment to all nationalities, whether you're local or outside of the country. We have the world's highest venture capital per capita, the world's highest number of startups per capita, highest R&D relative to the GDP, listings on the NASDAQ, and innovation. These are some inventions that you're probably familiar with. Cherry tomatoes, I don't know who thought about that, but that was developed in Israel. Waze, we see every taxi driver using it over here. The disc-on key from M-Systems, irrigation droppers, the pill cam, which is basically a pill that you swallow that has a camera and broadcasts to the doctor what it sees in your intestines, Intel chips, Mobileye, and of course, items that are used for kinetic movement, Nintendo Wii, etc. These are a list of international transactions we had. You could see the main players over here: Google, Symantec, EMC, Francisco partner, Cisco. So we basically have all of them in the country. And of course, famous quote. This basically shows you an interesting graph of the aggregate size of exits from 2013 until 2017 in terms of the deal size and the number of deals. So you can see with the time, the total average has gone up, the number of exits has gone up as well, and the total size of the transactions has gone up. This is basically a graph showing the same thing without the mega deals. Mega deals would be $1 billion deals. So we have one of those like once a year, but you can see streamlining and basically steady but moving upwards. Past 5 years, there were 8 companies that were sold for north of $1 billion, with SodaStream just sold to Pepsi 2 weeks ago for $3.2 billion. Mobileye sold to Intel for 15.4 something. Waze, Playtika, so these probably ring a bell. Just want to move along to things that are probably more interesting. So we have the old players that have been in the country, and these are all the big giants that you're familiar with: Google, Amazon, Apple, etc., etc. But now we have a list of new players that also came in. Sony, Singtel, etc., etc. I want to just move along quickly. Okay, so in 2017, we had a map of ICOs that we saw in Israel. So these numbers are probably medium or medium plus. I think all these were a big failure ultimately. I know I got a text from Pavel with a list of ICOs, how they were and the value now, and they've all kind of gone all the way down. So we're also involved in that. And here's basically the point which relates to this conference, relating to a quick overview. So similar to many countries, we don't have any specific authority that deals with DLT. I think the only countries that currently have legislation are Gibraltar and Malta. I think there are other jurisdictions coming into way, but we don't have any specific authority, and the idea is to each his own. So security authority is going to ask the question of whether or not tokens are a security. Tax authority are going to ask, what do you pay on gains on cryptocurrency, for example? If you sell your bitcoins, you bought them at $1, right? I had a client that bought bitcoins for $4, sold it for $100, and thought he had an excellent transaction until the prices went up. In terms of the general position that our legislators have, they're basically studying the new technology and trying to find solutions, but they're basically stalling to see what's going to be in the future. Position on Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is an asset. It's not a currency, and as such, it's taxed as an asset. And in terms of willingness to explore DLT, so the Bank of Israel sees great potential. No one really knows what is going to be of it, but they see great potential, and they're willing to look towards the future and see what that would hold. Here's a list of blockchain startups that we have in the country. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. In Israel, contrary to the SEC that Gordon mentioned before, so we had the general scare, which is similar to what the SEC had with Clayton, with the chairman Clayton. And the idea was that cryptocurrency are dangerous, they're very volatile, they're linked to terror or criminal activity, and so on and so forth. And that's a general notion. One of the main things that we saw in the country, and we're battling with it with all of our clients, is opening up bank accounts. To open up a bank account now for a crypto-related company is close to impossible. So there was a company called Bits of Gold that tried to open up a bank account, and the bank just said, you can't do that. Why? Because we think it's problematic. That went to court, and a couple of months ago, Supreme Court basically reversed the bank's decision and basically told the bank, you have to explain why a company cannot open up a bank account, even if it goes through KYC, AML, source of funds. So that's where we currently stand, but again, I wouldn't bank on opening up a bank account. We see that in Cyprus, it's impossible. In Europe, it's very difficult. We'll talk about that in a second. In terms of the tax authorities, so they're referring to all the gains, and they're basically saying, if you had some gains, but it's not part of your business, you're not going to pay VAT on it. But if it is part of your business, then you will be taxed with VAT. Of course, no one is a professional, right, when it comes to paying taxes. And in terms of the security front, so this is something very similar to what you see in the U.S. So in the U.S., we heard all sorts of sayings that, ICOs can be utility, but until now, they haven't seen any utility tokens. So the notion in Israel is it's going to be based on the totality of the circumstances, and it's basically what's called a duck test, right? So if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. The trends that we kind of see now are the main drivers are legal exposure and bank accounts. So I could probably have between 1 to 2 potential clients walking into my office every week and want to do an ICO or explore it. And I think probably 90 or 95% are turned down, mainly because their idea the way they want to exploit the idea is illegal, or because their thoughts of what an ICO is don't really make sense. So currently, the places that we would work with would be Gibraltar, would be Malta, whether as a subsidiary or a parent company. The main question is the question of structuring it. And when you structure the company in today's world, in 2018, it's not enough to open up a company to incorporate in Gibraltar. If you don't have any presence in Gibraltar, it's not going to be a Gibraltarian company, number one, from a tax perspective. Number two, you're not going to get any license from the Gibraltar authorities, whether it's a DLT license or a MiFID II license, in order to operate your business. You have to have currently at least 2 people on the ground. One has to be a compliance officer. The other one has to be a high-level individual, programmer, or something similar. And you're leaving easily between 200 to 300,000 pounds a year in Gibraltar for that kind of structure. Malta is much, much cheaper. That's why people go over there. But Malta is not as developed in terms of licenses. So Malta, to date, to my understanding, has not issued any licenses. Gibraltar issued 1, and now there's a pack of 8, I think, or 9. They're going to be issued. We had a very interesting meeting with the regulator in Gibraltar, and to hear his thoughts about how this is going to be. Personally, I think the regulator is going to be out of business with what we're seeing with the ICOs. So if we just jump a second to the issue of legislation, so what is basically a utility token or a security token? So the main notion is, as was mentioned before, I think by Lisa or someone else, is that if you have a token, and I think Gordon also mentioned that if you have a token, it's going to be deemed a security unless, among other things, you can use it once it's issued. And the main problem with these things is you see companies building a whole idea behind the economics of the tokens or the economy, but in real life, there is no machine that works. And the issuance of the token has no underlying asset except for the token itself. In other words, even though now people are not saying, if you invest in this token, it's going to appreciate by 2,000%, people are not buying tokens to use them. People are buying tokens to make money. And I always give the simple example of when I was a kid, I used to go play video games, and you walk inside, and you have all those video games, and you have to use a token to play. So you would take a $10 bill or a $20 bill, and you'd give the fat guy sitting in the entrance, and he'd just give you tokens. But no one would think to go back home with those tokens, come back after a year and sell them for a profit, right? Because you don't do that. That is a utility token. And everything else that basically is issued with an intention, even if it's implied, in my mind, will be deemed to be a security. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies going and trying to get licensed, whether they need to get the license or don't need to get the license. We were there about a month ago in Gibraltar asking for a DLT license, and the regulator said, this is not DLT, this is MiFID. MiFID deals with financial issues. The VFA is a license which is supposed to be issued in Malta, and the question over here is, why do you need it? So many clients say, I don't give a shit. I just want to have it. Why? Because this way I look like I'm in compliance. But the regulators don't really are not keen on issuing these licenses if there is no requirement, even though it does cost 70, 80,000 pounds easily. Another thing we're seeing is the issue that I wrote over here, keep it real. When someone comes over with a white paper and you look at the white paper and you say, hold on, I can do this whole thing, but without the token, then you know it's bullshit. And when I ask a whole bunch of people of why do you have the token over here, and they go, oh, for the white paper. Yeah, but I could do the same thing without the token. They go, yeah, but then I can't raise money. And that's basically the issue. If it's a real process, if it's a real business, it's going to work. If not, then it's just going to collapse like everything else. So that's what we see on that in terms of having real business and having substance. The last item, which I think is probably the main driver for all of this, is banks. A company cannot do anything without a bank. Pavel knows the stories that we had. Banks today are acting like policemen. Deutsche Bank, a couple of months ago, recruited 900 compliance officers. Now, compliance officers, forget about the fact that it's a German bank and compliance officers, and they're probably the best compliance officers in the world. But compliance officers have one job, and that is to find problems, to find issues. If you're a compliance officer and at the end of the week, the month, the year, you didn't find anything, then you're going to get sacked because you probably didn't do your job properly. And that's why banks are just going insane. FATCA started with FACTA. With FATCA, you have all the KYC, the AML, the source of funds, and every bank adds more and more layers on its requirements to do that. And what we're seeing now is a movement towards financial institutions. What are financial institutions? It's basically a bank that acts like a bank and looks like a bank. The only thing it cannot do is provide you with loans. Now, why would you need a loan? You'd rather not have loans. We see those mainly in Slovakia. We see those in Germany. We see those in many, many places. And that, in my mind, that's a trend that's just going to go and grow greater and greater. I think that when I'm a grandfather, my grandkids are going to say, hey, there were banks when you were younger, right? And I would say, yes. Like, why were there banks? What did you do with banks? Why would you have 10 tellers to do a job of a Mac? And I would say, well, I don't know. So clearly, I would not go long on banks, and the way they're moving, it doesn't look like a good investment. So people have to do business, and if they're not going to be able to do it in banks, it's going to be somewhere else, and that's where it's going. And I think the final slide, just before I have any questions. So we have many issues, and whoever was in the country was probably pleasantly surprised that they didn't blow up or something bad happened to them. But ultimately, this is what's called the Happy Planet Index. And we're currently number 11 in well-being. So even though life is not that easy where we live, we seem to enjoy it and we have a good time. And whoever hasn't visited is welcome, and whoever visited knows what I'm talking about. Happy to take questions.
I'll even dive in there.
What's that?
I'll dive in. That was great, though. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.
Very important.